The 2012 film Dredd was a promising reboot of the comic books movie franchise, and a huge improvement on the 1990s Stallone movie. However, it unfortunately didn't perform too strongly at the box office, and now runs the risk of drifting into obscurity. The movie proved very entertaining and smart, but I think something that still goes overlooked is how well written the film Dredd was. If you really look at it, every major character in the movie Dredd poses a straightforward, consistent, and unique stance as the film plays out, and how these characters interact is one of the most interesting details of the film. As well as this, there are various elements to the world of Mega City 1 that are very cleverly placed. A reason I think they go overlooked is because a lot of them are extremely understated, and could easily be dismissed as unintentional. The most understated character in the entire film is Judge Dredd himself, who on the outside could just be pigeonholed as a two-dimensional character, but there's more to him in this film than meets the eye, and in this video I wish to explore some of that. Now, in making this video, I need to stress that I'm not really an aficionado of the comics. While I've read some comics, and more since seeing this film, I first watched and became a fan of the movie Dredd as a film fan, and this is a video analogy of Dredd as a standalone film, which I very much think it is. Any comments made about the character Judge Dredd will be mainly in reference to the character portrayed by Karl Urban. One thing that I sometimes hear from people who have seen the film is that while they enjoyed it, they felt the ending didn't make sense because it concludes with Judge Dredd passing Judge Anderson for her initiation, which is said to be out of character. But for me, it's this final moment that ties the film together perfectly and shows that deeper level of Judge Dredd.
There's something else, something behind the control, something almost... Okay.
As I understand it, Judge Anderson in the comics is a character that Dredd has consistently respected, despite often disagreeing with her. But at the same time, a movie adaptation should have its own rules separate to its source material, even if they can be similar. Like I said, this is an analogy of the film, focusing specifically on Dredd's relationship with Anderson, and why I think it made sense that Judge Dredd passed her at the end of the film. Before going into Dredd's relationship with Anderson, let's look at how the character of Dredd is introduced himself. The word I used previously is understated, and the opening scene to Dredd is no exception. If you really think about it, a lot is said in the first couple of minutes of this film. First off, we have the nature of Mega City 1 very briefly explained to us. Basically, we are told that Mega City 1 is hell, a world torn apart, and the one thing holding it together are the judges. There being the city's only dominant structure is a key element.
Convulsing. Choking. Breaking under its own weight. Citizens in fear of the street. The gun. The gang.
We then move on to following a typical day in Judge Dredd's life, although already I'm overlooking an important narrative detail that happens when Dredd is gearing up. You'll notice when he loads his gun, or lawgiver, a close-up appears of the gun as it reads ID OK, a passing detail that proves very important at a turning point later in the film's story when Kay attempts to use Anderson's own lawgiver against her. Anyway, the film begins with a nice action-packed prologue of Dredd in pursuit of three criminals, the events of which are unrelated to the film's main plot, outside of the fact that the drug the criminals are using is slow-mo. Again, we are learning more about the film's world and Dredd's role in it. As Dredd pursues them, he communicates with Control, and in doing so, we have learned more about how the Hall of Justice operates. The criminals then notice Dredd behind them and instantly panic. So, simultaneously, within just a few minutes, we learn about the city, Dredd's role as a judge, the nature of criminal that exists in Mega City 1, how Dredd communicates with headquarters, and from the criminals' reaction, how the judges are something to be feared by people who break the law.
America is an irradiated wasteland. Within it lies a city. Outside the boundary walls, a desert. The cursed earth. Inside the walls, the cursed city, stretching from Boston to Washington, D.C.
In the third millennium, the world changed. Climate, nations, all were in upheaval. The earth transformed into a poisonous, scorched desert known as the Cursed Earth. Millions of people crowded into a few megacities, while roving bands of street savages.
And then, with only 2 lines of dialogue, we learn almost everything we need to know about the character Judge Dredd himself.
Do you require backup?
No.
You see, everything in Dredd is very direct and efficient, both the character Dredd and the film itself. It is a world where there is no time to be wasted. Another clever detail in this scene is the inclusion of the word drock, which appears in the criminal's van. I've learned that drock is the comic book substitute for swear words like the use of the word frack in Battlestar Galactica and the word smeg in Red Dwarf. What's particularly amusing about this detail is that while the word drock appears written down, almost every single sentence that one of the criminals uses through their presence on the screen includes the word fuck.
Think of everything fucking me! Fuck! Fuck off! Fuck! He's right on us! We're fucking dead! Fucking get out of here! Fuck up! You got no fucking leverage! No. Yeah, now here's the deal. You let me walk or I blow her fucking brains out.
It's as if the film is saying, this is not the comic, this is the real thing. After apprehending the criminals, Dredd hunts down the last one who escapes and takes a hostage. When Dredd's very brief attempt to negotiate fails, he shoots the criminal in the face, successfully saving the hostage, who thanks him, despite clearly being just as terrified of Dredd as she was of the criminal. Now, this might seem like an extremely simple scene, but there are several moments like this in the film that appear very incidental that I think have some very smart subtext. Let me jump ahead to the following scene in which we are introduced to Judge Anderson and the Chief Judge, who serves as the bookending character to the main plot of the film. This is the scene where Judge Dredd reveals having a possible prejudice towards mutants.
She's a mutant.
Despite a resilience towards taking a mutant judge under his wing, the Chief Judge orders Dredd to do so, and Dredd complies. Or rather, he says nothing, and then in the next scene we see him complying. Let me now jump ahead a good bit further to a moment that occurs after the blast doors of Petries have been shut to trap Judge Dredd and Anderson. Dredd approaches the paramedic and insists he aid them. When the paramedic denies him any help, take a look at what happens.
Open up.
Negative, Judge.
You know what's going on out here.
We need a place we can defend.
Then you better find someplace else. This is a medical facility, neutral ground.
Neutral? You're not neutral, you're choosing sides.
Petries has been sealed by blast doors designed to withstand attack. No one's getting out, no one's coming in. And you have every clan affiliate in the block after your blood. There are no sides. You're already dead.
After the paramedic explains his reasons for not helping, Dredd simply walks away and makes a sarcastic comment about the med center being closed.
Looks like the med center's closed early today.
He doesn't say anything about coming back and arresting or executing the paramedic even though he went against his orders, technically obstructing justice. Later in the film, the paramedic is executed, so we never really know what Dredd would have done if he saw him again after the blast doors were lifted. You could argue that he would have come back and charged him with obstructing justice or indirectly aiding criminals, but if that were the case, wouldn't he have said something like,
When this is over, I'm coming back for you.
or,
You're just lucky you're in there.
Don't be here when we get back.
But like I said, he just walks away and forgets about it. It's my theory that while Judge Dredd believes in the law and the order of justice, he is also a firm believer in logic, and that his disgust of criminals is that they are a selfish and irrational kind of people. Throughout the film, he employs an extremely mechanistic approach to every situation, similar to RoboCop, a film that was originally inspired by the Judge Dredd comic. Ironically, influences of RoboCop can be found in the film Dredd.
Please put down your weapon. You have 20 seconds to comply.
You now have 20 seconds to comply.
In talking to the paramedic, he orders for assistance. When the paramedic refuses, Dredd accuses him of taking the criminal's side. But when the paramedic gives him a clear, logical reason for his actions, Dredd steps back. Perhaps he does this because, while the paramedic isn't assisting him personally, his actions come from a concern for a greater good, and not a personal reason. And even if Dredd doesn't agree with these actions, he respects the paramedic for thinking his actions through. Although maybe Dredd does agree. Comparing this to Dredd's hostage negotiations, note how he gives no time to the criminal holding a gun to a civilian's face.
Negotiation's over.
Hey, what are you doing? You hear what I said? I'll kill the bitch!
Yeah, I heard you, hotshot.
Despite the criminal believing that this gives him leverage over Dredd,
You know, you aren't a very good negotiator, Judge. You know why? You got no fucking leverage!
And laying out a set of rules, his selfish and irrational actions actually reduce his chances in arguing with the judge, and it is ultimately a part of his demise. You could argue that, considering his position, the paramedic had a certain rank that allowed him the legal right to make such a decision, but compare this to how Dredd reacts to Judge Chan on suspicion that he's lying to him. The moment he finds the tiniest flaw in his alibi, he instantly attempts to kill him, an excellent example of just how strict the law is and how judges themselves are in no way an exception. The role of a paramedic in the world of Mega City 1 is an interesting detail to the film as well. In the opening scene, Dredd makes a call for paramedics just before he tracks down the final criminal.
Control. Paramedics to my GPS. Multiple wounded and bodies for recycling.
But later all we see is a machine assembling corpses. It would seem though that the only injuries in this case are all fatalities. There are also references through the film of recyc, which if I'm not mistaken is a process also in the comic where dead bodies in Mega City 1 are broken down and different parts are recycled for various purposes. But also, look at how Dredd reacts earlier when the criminals crash into an innocent bystander on the road. He simply adds the charges and moves on. We don't really see him making a call for a paramedic to aid the bystander. So that's it? He's just left there? There's something particularly disturbing about the image of Dredd swerving to avoid the bystander's corpse and moving on. Another thing, look at how Dredd treats his own wound much later in the film when he's shot through his lower back and abdomen. All he does is close up the exit wound and keeps moving. At the end of the film, he seemingly doesn't even seek any medical attention when there are paramedics at the scene. He seems willing to just walk it off like it was a flesh wound. Just think about this. He still has a hole in his back and a tear in his innards, and he's just going to walk it off. These details add more to the idea that the law in Mega City 1 is a force that just pushes forward and only deals with the smaller details when there's time. As well as this, it's very possible that the medical facilities in Mega City 1 aren't as available as weaponry and other technologies. Any use of medical supplies in the film are rarely seen and greatly rationed, even by the judges themselves. Part of the paramedics' reason to deny Dredd assistance are almost likely to defend the facilities themselves. Perhaps he makes this decision knowing that any supplies or equipment that are lost in the fight are not guaranteed to be replaced soon or even at all, and innocent people will suffer needlessly. And being a paramedic in Peachtrees, perhaps like Anderson, he believes that the residents of Peachtrees are worth helping.
I was born and raised in a block like this. Before the Justice Department took me, I know there are good people inside. Good families just trying to get by. Yes, I believe I can make a difference.
Admirable.
In the paramedics' eyes, Dredd and Anderson are already dead.
You're already dead.
So saving them would be a futile sacrifice of needed supplies for other people. Also, considering how dominant criminal activity is in Peachtrees and how rare a judge appearing is...
You know how often we get a judge up in Peachtrees?
Well, you got one now.
Dredd and Anderson's presence could easily feel more like an obstruction than a form of aid to the paramedic, especially when you factor in the typical amount of violence and damage that ensues when a judge has to intervene on a situation. Okay, this next point might be a stretch, but we never see Dredd approach any other medical facilities in Peachtrees, and as far as I know, there's not another one to be seen. Could it be that this facility is the only one in the entire of the Mega Block? That's all the more reason for the paramedic to not want to sacrifice precious medical supplies if he truly believes Dredd and Anderson are going to die regardless of what he does. With that selfless kind of logic, it makes sense that Dredd would agree with him, despite what it means for his own life, or even what the law might say. It's this passive dismissal that gives an insight to the kind of compassion that Dredd has. It may be low, but it's there, and it's not just here that we see it. As you saw before, there's a moment previous where Dredd encounters a homeless man whom he's willing to overlook.
Rookie. Judgment.
Vagrancy, 3 weeks ISO cubes, but prioritize murders?
Correct. Don't be here when we get back.
This is mainly because he's already occupied with a more important crime, and he does eventually attempt to arrest the homeless man, moments before he's crushed by the blast doors. But for a moment he allowed him a chance to walk. Similarly, he overlooks the two teenagers when Kay escapes with Anderson, while originally he threatened
Body bags or juve cubes?
But when the situation gets complicated, he stuns them and moves on. That said, it's possible that at the end of the film, judges were sent in to arrest the two kids. But perhaps he's willing to leave them like the innocent bystander at the beginning of the film, and like how he was going to leave the homeless man with a second chance. And while Anderson does reference that the protocol is to prioritize the murders, Dredd is the one who, instead of ordering the homeless man to stay there, insists he should leave. Similarly, in the negotiation scene at the beginning of the film, he offers a chance for the criminal to live. It's not a very good alternative, but it's something.
Release the hostage, unharmed, and I guarantee you a sentence of life in an ISO cube without parole.
Life without parole? That's a deal you offered?
Only if you comply.
As stated, in the scene where he agrees to take Anderson under his wing, from the very beginning he expresses an opposition towards training a mutant. But that's not the only reason. It is also mentioned that she failed her examinations, marginally.
She's a mutant.
The Judges' Council have chosen to overlook her status. So you will too. She's the most powerful psychic we've ever come across by a huge margin. The Judges are losing the war for this city. We believe she could be a major asset. As I said, her final score was only 3 points below a pass. It's marginal.
It's not marginal. She failed.
Her not passing regulation and her status as a mutant is enough for Dredd not to accept her. But the Chief Judge explains. First of all,
the Judges' Council have chosen to overlook her status. So you will too.
As a higher-ranking officer, Dredd is forced by chain of command to comply. But blindly following orders isn't the only reason he's given. And it would seem the Chief Judge knows that simple orders aren't enough to convince Dredd.
She's the most powerful psychic we've ever come across by a huge margin. The Judges are losing the war for this city. We believe she could be a major asset.
While Dredd follows the law, the reason for accepting Anderson is ultimately a logical one, to help save the city. Or, arguably, to simply control it better. But it's this reason which is why the law exists. And so Dredd complies, not just for lawful reasons, but logical ones. Finally, looking at Anderson and Dredd's relationship, throughout the film he quizzes Anderson on regulation and protocol, to which Anderson systematically recalls. It's during the judgment calls that Dredd and Anderson differ. But those wouldn't be the reasons she'd fail. Listen again to the opening monologue in which Dredd describes the state of Mega City 1.
Convulsing. Choking. Breaking under its own weight.
This excellently describes the struggle that the city is in, and explains the no-nonsense, uncompromising approach its Justice Department has. Compared to the corrupt Judge Lex's description, a character who is out for his own means.
You know what Mega City 1 is, Dredd? It's a fucking meat grinder. People go in one end. And meat comes out the other.
Reload.
In contrast, Dredd's perspective of the city is similarly pessimistic, and yet he comes off as a noble figure by taking the path of aiding and balancing the city, even if his methods are questionable. Judge Anderson is also noble. Smart, tough, and somewhat innocent, she pursues a life of being a judge not for personal reasons, but to aid a greater good. Despite her marginal fail, she is well studied, and her arc in the film is typical of a character transitioning from her book smarts to experiencing the harsher reality of being in the real world. But she seems very well prepared for this inevitable change.
You ready?
Yes, sir.
You don't look ready.
Just adrenaline, sir.
Throughout the film, she adjusts to a reality of law enforcement in Mega City 1 and its extreme circumstances. But her change isn't treated sentimentally by the film. It's somewhat procedural, which is very appropriate to the film's tone. Throughout the film, there is a subtle rise in Dredd's approval of Anderson as he observes her performance and how she notably toughens up throughout the film.
Ready?
Yeah.
You look ready.
The process of this, too, is pretty straightforward and, as said before, procedural. There are two moments, however, that are worthy of note. The first is after Anderson has read Kay's mind, and the two have learned that Mama is Mega City 1's supplier of slow-mo. Dredd and Anderson discuss their next course of action. When Anderson provides two options, Dredd suggests a third, and there's some ambiguity in their conclusion.
We have new intel about Mama, and we've managed to get a 1024 to control. Parameters are shifting. What are the options, Anderson?
Keep moving and attempt to avoid further detection, or find a place to defend. Same as before, except now we know backups inbound.
You're giving us two options, defend or hide.
Yes, sir.
What about we attack? Head straight for Mama.
Is that an option?
Well, she's guilty. We're judges.
Sir, with backup inbound, I think we should wait until the odds have shifted in our favor. Wrong answer?
You're the psychic.
First of all, Dredd's comment,
Well, she's guilty. We're judges.
is kind of hilarious. For a moment, his gung-ho attitude seems to defy his logic, as if being correct is enough in the situation they're in. But really, the ambiguity lies in his final line.
Wrong answer?
You're the psychic.
Does that mean Anderson is wrong? Or was she right? It's not really made clear. Or maybe his sarcastic dismissal is down to more than that. Perhaps Dredd really is trying to teach Anderson to think for herself, because Mega City 1 is too dangerous a world for you to rely on anyone else's instincts and judgment but your own, which, by the way, is not the same as relying on your own interests. Considering Dredd's own subtle ways of judging situations rather than judging based purely on the law, as we've covered, perhaps Dredd's method of assessing Anderson is by seeing if she can learn that she needs to rely on herself, as well as the word of the law. So perhaps the wrong decision she made was asking if she'd made the wrong decision. The second moment worthy of note between Dredd and Anderson is their discussion after Anderson lets the techie free. Dredd accuses Anderson of letting a criminal go, previously mentioned to be an automatic fail. However, Anderson explains her reason.
Go. Get out of here.
Mind explaining yourself, rookie? Betting a felon is not just a fail offense. It's a crime.
I already picked up the fail when I lost my primary weapon. I'm not going to be a judge, and I don't need to be a mind reader to know it. He's a victim, not a perp, and until my assessment is formally over, I'm still entitled to dispense justice, and that's what I just did by letting him go. Maybe that'll be the one difference I do make. The code to Mama's chambers is 49436. Let's finish this.
Dredd is sort of left speechless by Anderson's confidence in her logic and execution and says nothing, but there's sort of a nod of approval in his reaction. Even if he doesn't necessarily agree with her, he respects her means of logic in supplying law and order. Despite her belief that she's doomed to inevitably fail her assessment, Anderson states that she still wishes to dispense justice regardless of her status, proving to Dredd that she is at heart a believer in enforcing law and order, despite what the rules or her rank might say, which possibly is what determines Dredd's decision to pass. If not, it's a major factor. It's the moment that Anderson shows to Dredd that she has changed. She's no longer looking for permission to decide, but instead is making her own calls based on decisions beyond the law, and more for the purpose of comprehensive logic, which we've explored as being an important concept for Dredd. The final moment of significance is the very end, after Dredd kills Malma and the blast doors are finally opened. Dredd tells Anderson her assessment is over. Her reaction is seemingly of disappointment. It's likely because of her perceived failure, but perhaps it's more the callousness of Dredd. Considering just moments before, they seemingly shared an intimate, but not romantic moment, as Dredd aided her wounds. Anderson hands Dredd her badge, and storms off in reaction.
So shines a good deed in a weary world.
As the chief judge approaches Dredd, she asks him about the situation, to which Dredd supplies the punchline of the film.
So what happened in there?
Drug bust.
Looked like you've been through it.
Perps were uncooperative.
At this moment, we realise that the events of the main plot of the film have barely phased Dredd, and the phrasing of his description implied that this was not that eventful a day for him. Oddly enough, this always reminds me of a moment in Men in Black, which is a movie, while very different in tone, has similar elements to Dredd. Both are about a prestigious and top-class organisation that is tasked with defence and law enforcement under particularly dangerous circumstances. They also both have the dynamic of an old cop teaching a rookie.
Alright, I'm in. Because look, there's some next-level shit going on around here, and I'm with that. But before y'all get to beaming me up, it's a couple things I want you to understand. First off, you chose me. So you recognize the skills. And I don't want nobody calling me son or kid or sport or nothing like that, cool?
Cool, whatever you say, Slick.
In Men in Black, there's a moment where Jay and Kay chase down their enemy. While Jay frantically runs after him and open fires in public, Kay scolds Jay for not following the Men in Black's rules of discretion, in that the public are never to become aware of the existence of aliens living among us.
We do not discharge our weapons in view of the public.
Man, we ain't got time for this cover-up bullshit. I don't know whether or not you've forgotten, but there's an alien battle cruiser about to...
There's always an alien battle cruiser or a Carillion death ray or an intergalactic plague that's about to wipe out life on this miserable little planet. The only way these people get on with their happy lives is they do not know about it.
It's at this moment that Jay realizes the true nature of working for the MIB. That the circumstances of the film's plot, however ridiculous, are not in fact special, and that working for the MIB will involve dealing with these types of situations on a regular basis. This is the same in Dredd. We realize that his encounters in Peachtrees are not special and are just all in a day's work for Dredd.
It's all a deep end.
And while this kind of thing may not happen every day, it's still the kind of thing he has to take on the chin and just move past to carry on with his job. Earlier I mentioned the importance of this exchange Dredd has with Control at the beginning of the film.
Do you require backup?
No.
As I stated before, this shows us almost everything we need to know about Dredd, and his final moments with the Chief Judge are the same. In denying backup, we see his mechanistic and stark approach to every situation, but in saying he doesn't need backup, we also learn of his non-egotistical confidence, and that he can handle the situation by himself. And the truth about Judge Dredd is that he really is that good at his job.
Sir, he's thinking about making a move for your gun.
Yeah.
He just changed his mind.
Yep.
It's also worth mentioning that when you look at the details, the character Momo really did have everything thought through in locking the two judges into the building and leaving them to be killed. The only thing she didn't account for is that one of those judges happened to be Judge Dredd.
This is Judge Dredd.
Let him talk.
Finally, in assessing Anderson's performance, he states that she's a pass to be a judge.
She's a pass.
Like I said, this for me ties the film together perfectly as Dredd makes his final judgment. But does it really make sense that he would pass her? All things considered, let's look at the reasons Dredd would fail Anderson. The main ones would be the loss of her gun and letting a criminal free, which Dredd states in the beginning of the film as being automatic fails.
A rookie judge on assessment is likely to be involved in armed combat. 1-5 don't survive the first day. You may be required to carry out on-the-spot executions of convicted felons.
Yes, sir.
Incorrect sentencing is an automatic fail. Disobeying a direct order from your assessment officer is an automatic fail. Losing your primary weapon or having it taken from you is an automatic fail.
Yes, sir.
You ready, rookie?
I am.
Mandatory vehicle check.
Your assessment starts now.
First of all, Anderson assesses the techie to be innocent from reading his mind and determining him to in fact be an unwilling assailant to Momo. His fear and displeasure in assisting Momo is made evident through the film, and he is heavily portrayed as a victim. While Dredd could easily persecute the techie for being an accessory to the crime despite having no choice, instead, Anderson assertively makes the judgment and states her reasons, which are thought out logically and are backed up by the law. So really that just leaves the loss of her gun, which falls into the hands of Kay when she's held captive. Arguably this should have given her an automatic fail, but does this count as her losing her gun? The first thing that Dredd cites is that 1 in 5 rookies don't survive the first day.
A rookie judge on assessment is likely to be involved in armed combat. 1-5 don't survive the first day.
Another moment early on is when Dredd questions Anderson for why she doesn't have her helmet on.
I'm wondering when you'd remember you left your helmet behind.
Sir, a helmet can interfere with my psychic abilities.
I think a bullet might interfere with them more.
Dredd inquires about the misplacement of her helmet out of concern for her safety. And as we've seen before, much of his assessment is based on her becoming more independent and confident in her judgment. Perhaps these assessment rules are more for the safety of the judges themselves, and the loss of her gun was meant more in the case of her misplacing it and leaving herself defenseless. When in fact, by allowing Kay to attempt to fire at her, she tricks Kay into losing his arm, and even with her arms bound, she's not defenseless against him. She also quickly improvises and arms herself with another weapon, and proves very capable with it. To a fault. So really that takes apart the two solid reasons for Anderson to fail. The freeing the criminal and the loss of her gun. While technically she did commit both assessment failing acts, logically and practically she didn't. And we've seen how Dredd has a logical and practical side in his methods. An argument I've heard is that Dredd would still go by the book and follow the rules literally. So while Anderson practically didn't break the rules, she did technically.
At the end of the day, when you're all alone in the dark, the only thing that counts is this. The law.
Perhaps this is true, but whose rules is Dredd following in making his assessment? Are these a set of standard rookie assessment rules made by the Hall of Justice? I'm not so sure that they are. Let's look again at Dredd's conversation with the Chief Judge. The character of the Chief Judge seems to be the only one in the film that knows Dredd well and understands how he ticks. There's a shorthand between the two in their two conversations at the beginning and the end of the film. While the Chief Judge appears more humane and emotional than Dredd, she also has a systematic and logical approach to things. Perhaps she can only afford to be more emotional and humane, given that her position isn't out on the streets like Dredd's is, evidenced by her cleaner, less protective uniform compared to Dredd's war-torn look. But it's important to note how she instructs Dredd to take Anderson along with her. It's very casual.
I want you to take her out. Give her one day in the field, supervised. See if she makes the grade. Sink or swim. Chuck her in the deep end.
So, it's possible that the rookie assessment rules are just golden rules of Dredd's own making, and her assessment is based solely on Dredd's opinion. Perhaps not in general, but certainly in this case. Also, if Dredd really was just a complete mindless rule-abiding officer, then he would never have taken Anderson with him in the first place because, according to the rules, she never should have reached the rank of rookie street judge at all, having technically failed her exam.
Her final score was only 3 points below a pass. It's marginal.
It's not marginal. She failed.
The girl's getting one more chance.
It's important to note the final moments before Dredd announces his assessment, which I think affect or at least confirm his final decision. As you can see, he observes Anderson leaving. Although her storming off is a dismissal of Dredd, note how she doesn't say anything and just efficiently leaves, wasting no time. And look at what she does next. She denies medical attention for herself. Perhaps that's the final confirmation that she finally gets it. We've already seen the emphasis on how sparse medical supplies are in Mega City 1, even to judges themselves. Although Dredd had just previously tended to her wounds, we've seen how broadly he treats his own injuries, and therefore there could be more medical attention that Anderson could receive. But even though she doesn't even consider herself a judge anymore, she just doesn't give a fuck. And perhaps that's the lesson Dredd has been trying to teach her all along, that while there can be differences between what the rules say and what's the right thing to do, at the end of the day, you just have to push along and not look for anyone to hold your hand. Dredd then gives his final assessment and walks out into the streets. Oddly enough, this is very similar to the ending of the 1990s movie.
I'm a street judge, and I'm very late for work.
Only in that film, there's an awful melodramatic moment where Judge Dredd, or rather what the film thinks passes for Judge Dredd, drives out and ponders the view of Mega City 1, as the film further shows it had no idea what tone to tell its story with.
Dredd? I taught him everything he knows.
Dredd? That's it? No goodbye?
Goodbye, Hershey.
To tell you the truth, I'm probably a much better kisser. Okay, come on, let's go, will you? Can we swing by a cash machine?
Feels good to be human, don't you think?
I knew you'd say that.
Meanwhile, in the 2012 film, Judge Dredd just walks away. That's it. He's just heading out with more work to do. He's still got possible internal bleeding in his guts, another mark along with the other scratches on his uniform, many present at the beginning of the film. And while Dredd goes through some change in the film, really it's Judge Anderson who is the character with the biggest arc. She learns what it takes to be a judge and accepts it. Now you might think it's ambiguous as to whether or not she accepts her role as judge considering everything she's been through. We don't see her learning that she passed her assessment after all. But the final two shots in the film tell us everything. The first is a shot of Judge Anderson leaving the Hall of Justice. This shot is unmistakably Anderson later in time heading out to the streets, now as a fully qualified street judge. This is followed by the final image of the film, a judge driving off into the distance on patrol to serve the streets of Mega City 1. It's most likely that the judge scene at the end is Anderson, as the previous shot shows her walking towards various judge vehicles, including the motorbikes. But you could argue that it's Dredd, as the two share lead roles in the film, and the juxtaposition of Anderson walking out in the streets with the image of Dredd driving away on his bike is a nice way of showing the two characters parting ways, as they both go out to dispense justice in the same massive immersive city. Although personally, I like to think it's Anderson in that final shot. If it's Anderson, then that means the film begins with Dredd preparing himself and driving off into the streets, and ends with Anderson doing the same, thus completing a circle like that between master and apprentice. But either way, the ending is the same. Anderson is now a judge, passed under Dredd's principles both within and outside the law, and she's ready to face the harsh streets alone. But let me know what you think in the comment section.
Interesting.
And if you're at all a fan of the movie Dredd, I urge you, if you haven't already, to sign the online petition campaigning for a sequel. The Dredd movie universe is one that I think is extremely worthy of expanding, and you will find links below for the petition along with the Facebook and Twitter pages. Thanks for watching.